Welcome to the Independent Advisors Podcast, where we dive into the world of stocks, tradable markets, and financial planning with Jessup Wealth Management's Chief Investment Officer, Mark McEvily, and CEO, Matt Jessup. You'll hear tips, tricks, and strategies to address your financial well-being and, most importantly, conveyed in a way that everyone can understand. Here are your hosts, Mark and Matt.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 237 of the Independent Advisors Podcast, where Matt Jessup and I, Mark McEvily, bring you everything you need to know from the past week in the world of financial markets and financial planning. So good morning, Matt.
Morning, Mark. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. Nice to be back on the podcast with you. Have we done one together this year yet? Maybe one.
I think once we did.
Yeah, maybe
once
one.
we did.
So
yeah, tells you how busy we've been.
Yeah, I know.
It is earnings season. I mean,
it is. Yep, busy first month
is the
of the
time
year,
of the
like
year.
It always is. Yeah.
Yes.
As always, we're going to quickly review the month to date, which obviously is the year to date performance of the major market indices that we track. This data is from Y Charts, and as of January 31st. S&P 500 index up 1.6% for the month of January. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 1.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 1%. The Russell 2000 Small Cap Index down 3.9%. And the Vanguard All World Ex United States ETF down 1.7%. 3-month Treasury rate at 5.42%. 2-year Treasury rate at 4.27%, and the 10-year Treasury rate at 3.99%. Moving on to big headlines and current events from the week, like you kind of alluded to, Matt, this was a really big week for earnings, especially big tech. So Google, Microsoft, Advanced Micro Devices, Starbucks all reported on Tuesday. And then we have Apple, Amazon, Meta, reporting tonight after the market close. And then in addition to that, we had the Fed holding rates steady yesterday at their meeting. So a lot of a big data filled week, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any surprises from the Fed meeting yesterday.
No, I don't think so either. Bank of England followed in the Fed's footsteps, it seemed like yesterday, by just leaving rates unchanged for right now.
Yeah.
First thing I had for this week, Matt, was a tweet from Bespoke Investment Research. This was on January 25th. Jenna will throw this up for viewers on the YouTube. You can find it in our show notes. It was a tweet that said the S&P 500 technology sector weight in the index just crossed above 30% for the first time since 2000. So what you're going to see if you're looking on the screen right now is that back right before the tech bubble burst, the technology sector as a percentage of the S&P 500, so how many tech companies are in the S&P 500, got up to just under 35%. And right now is the first time since the early 2000s that we've creeped back over that 30% level regarding tech as a percentage of the S&P 500. In addition to that, Matt, I have another chart from a blog called The Grindstone Intelligence that shows the relative strength of the technology sector versus the S&P 500. And what listeners and viewers can see on this chart is that technology stocks are making a new all-time relative high versus the broader market. So stocks haven't been at this level since 2000, right? Which is 24 years ago. So again, I know that people are probably sick of me talking about it, and they're going to be sick of me talking about it again here because my next subject is on this same spectrum, is that you shouldn't be afraid of all-time highs and you shouldn't be afraid of strength. So, the headline is going to read, technology sector makes new all-time relative high to the S&P 500. It's never performed this well against the S&P 500. And automatically people are going to think, well, if it's never been this high before, then a drop is imminent. which could be the case, but it could not be the case. A lot of times we see, things go on to make new all-time highs and they just keep going up and to the right on the chart. So really interesting. Thought that this was probably going to get some airtime on some major media financial outlets. So just thought it was interesting and wanted to share my thoughts.
No, I think it's great. Here's the biggest difference that people need to talk about when they show these two charts. When we go back to the late 90s and the early 2000s, the biggest difference is this. A majority of those companies in tech at that time were not making a profit, and their balance sheets were an absolute disaster. And I'll bluntly say it, the reason the dot-com burst occurred is you can only burn through money and lose money for so long before you run out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? As they could not break even, people were not going to throw good money after bad. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's exactly what occurred. You
Right.
fast forward to today, you look at a lot of these technology names. What are you seeing? Oh my gosh, they're not only profitable, their balance sheets are amazing. So these are not apples to apples conversations. And if anyone tries to have that conversation with me, I might blow my top.
And I think it makes sense from a, like a utilization standpoint, right? So back when the US economy was dependent on transportation companies, right? They made up a much larger portion of the US stock market than a lot of other sectors, right? Or a lot of other industries. And I don't think it's any different now, is that our economy is so tech dependent that it really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that technology by far is the largest percentage of the pie of the S&P 500. So
Last comment, look at where the earnings growth is coming from. If right now you are sitting in front of Mark McEvily's screen here at Jessup Wealth Management, he's our chief investment officer, and you're doing screens by sectors of the market, healthcare, finance, just go down all the sectors. Mark, where's a majority of the earnings growth coming from?
yeah, tech.
Shocker.
Yeah,
Shocker, money's going into the sector. It's like
it is. So, and I mean, I think you can make an argument today that most companies today could somehow, some way be classified as a tech company, right? Because we all
everyone
use
wants to be classified as an AI company.
right. And yeah, soon every
Soon
company's
Kroger's going to
be.
come out and be like, hey, we're AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right.
I'm not trying to pick on Kroger, by the way. I'm just throwing it out there because I went shopping there recently. So
Yeah, no, I get it. No, it's gonna be interesting. Well, you heard it here first. We'll be the first to give you our review on Kroger's first AI tool, which actually would probably be pretty helpful now that you say
probably.
it. Next thing I had was a tweet from Ryan Dietrich on December 30th of last year. Ryan says the Russell 2000, which is the small cap index here in the US, just gained 12.1% in December, the 9th best month ever. I found 19 other times where the Russell 2000 index was greater than 10% for the year. The index was higher 6 months later 90% of the time, and higher a year later 14 times and up 15.8% on average. So I know I already said it, but I want to bang this point home that,
Do it.
strength begets strength, and people shouldn't be afraid that just because a stock or an index or a sector or an industry had a really good month, that doesn't mean that the next month or the next 6 months or even the next year has to be negative. A lot of the times actually is positive. So that's something that shouldn't scare people. If we led our lives every single day waiting for the next shoe to drop or waiting for the next market correction and being anxious about that, it wouldn't be good for anybody, right? And you should treat your portfolio the same. Just because something is going up doesn't mean it immediately has to come down.
Agreed. And I think if you look at the performance disparity between large and small the last couple of years, small has really underperformed the large cap indices. And I think that has to be noted as well, that, you know, Doesn't mean it's going to happen this year, but sooner rather than later, smalls are going to have their day in the sunshine.
Yeah, they will for sure. Last thing was another one from Ryan Dietrich. I feel like we could almost do an entire podcast with the content that Ryan puts out. So way to go, Ryan. Keep that up, please.
Yeah, good stuff.
He says, did you know that stocks have gained in a pre-election year and an election year after a negative midterm year every time since 1950? That's
Can you say that again, please? 17 out of what?
17 out of 17, or 100% of the time. Do you really think this streak will end in 2024? So let's break this down again. Ryan does a lot of work on presidential election cycles. So does JC Peretz with All-Star Charts. So do we. Typically what you see is midterm years, so year 2 of a new presidency, tends to be relatively weak for the markets. Year 3, or what we all call the pre-election year, tends to be the best year out of the 4-year cycle, which was last year, okay? And now we're in the election year. So again, Ryan says, did you know that stocks have gained in a pre-election year and election year after a negative midterm year every time since 1950? In 2022, we had a negative midterm year. In 2023, we had a very positive pre-election year. So what we're getting to here is history says 2024, this election year, could be pretty strong. And you can see in this graphic that it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat in the White House or if it's a Republican in the White House.
Doesn't matter.
It's almost it's almost split like 50-50 almost, or as close as you can get to it, right? So I'm not saying it's going to be another 20% year, but things don't look too bad when you take this data. And
guess what? We're going to be most likely in a easing interest rate environment as the year goes on.
Right.
That doesn't hurt us.
Right. Which is just a coincidence, right?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I'm telling you, both sides of the aisle do it. They are going to perk up this economy as much as they can, especially in the second half of the year. Make it look good.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, well, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect segue for me. I don't know. We don't compare notes on these things when we prep for these podcasts, ladies and gentlemen. And Mark just tees me up perfectly on a beautiful par 3. Here we go. So the first thing is I'm going to go over one of my concerns in 2024 as the year goes on. It's in regards to the labor market and layoffs. Jenna's going to put up this this illustration, this X post by Carl Quintanilla. He is a news anchor with CNBC, and it is a piece from the Wall Street Journal you're going to see here. And so for our traditional podcast listeners, I'm going to verbalize this. The headline says, in big, bold letters, plummeting inflation raises new risk for Fed, rising real interest rates. Central bank feels pressure to cut interest rates as falling inflation raises the real cost of borrowing. And this is the quote that Carl put. The greater risk now is not taking too long to cut rates, causing damage to the labor market that is hard to repair. In November, for example, the hiring rate in the U.S. dropped to its lowest level in 10 years, a sign more companies might feel they're overstaffed. So I'm going to make everyone aware here. There have been a lot of layoff announcements so far to start the year, but not sizable ones. There are a couple, but just a lot of them. And I'm going to name a couple just if you're educated. This is what I've found. So Google laying off hundreds of software engineers, Discord hundreds, Citigroup 20,000, Amazon, which bought also MGM Studios and Twitch, hundreds. Nike and Intel would not disclose how many. BlackRock 3% of staff. Rent the Runway 10%. Unity Software 25%. eBay 1,000. Microsoft 1,900. Salesforce 700. REI 300, Wayfair 13% of staff, TikTok 60, even old TikTok, Mark. Riot Games 11% of staff or 530 jobs. SAP, the software company, 8,000. UPS 12,000. Square 1,000. Regions Bank 20,000, and American Airlines about 650 just to name a few. Now, why am I highlighting this? Okay. Not all of this news is bad for the economy. The silver lining is that there is still, as of the last report, Mark, 8.7 million job openings. That number peaked at 12 million at the height of the issues during the pandemic. As the labor market normalizes, so should inflationary pressures on wages. This is the key part. Okay. That pressure that employers felt to raise wages in order to keep staff from leaving. Employers, for the most part, passed that on, that higher cost of doing business, through price hikes in their product or service. So I think a couple of things are going to happen here as the year goes on. These number of job openings are going to come down. Before the pandemic, there were about 7 million job openings. My 2 cents, we're probably going to get there sometime in the second half of the year. So what's going to happen is as people get laid off, there's plenty of job openings right now, generally speaking, where that excess capacity is going to get absorbed by the system. But these job openings are going to come down, and you're going to see more of the power relationship between employer and employee is going to head more towards back the employer. And I think it's going to actually help this inflationary issue we've had the last couple of years. My last comment is, if I'm the Fed, you got to understand that rate cuts have a delayed effect on the economy. I wouldn't be sitting around on my hands too long. I think at worst, it needs to be the May meeting that they start the cuts. If it were me, I would do March. I wouldn't mess around with this. But I think that you're seeing companies getting by with less. They're investing in technological innovation. Mark, your comments.
No, I think it's, the first time, which I think is a good thing, because I think we should continue to, challenge the narrative. I think maybe one of the criticisms or us or people in our industry is we're always bullish, right? And not a lot of us get bearish too often, but this is something that is worth watching, because even though in the grand scheme of things, it's not a ton of layoffs. It's still some pretty big numbers. I mean, Citibank 20,000. That's not a
Regions
small
20,000. You're seeing them, yeah.
So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, just something to note. You might see some headlines on this, ladies and gentlemen, as the year goes on. Next thing, you're going to start hearing about supply issues again. I hope I'm wrong about this. So this is a post by Andreas Steno of Steno Research on January 28th, Mark. Jenna will put up this chart for our YouTube viewers. I would highly recommend this in our show notes for our traditional podcast listeners. Mark, remind our listeners how they can access our notes, please.
Yeah. So you can go to Twitter at Jessup Wealth, or Facebook or LinkedIn Jessup Wealth Management to access these. And we have some nice things actually coming up with show notes, hopefully later this year. So throw out a little teaser for people.
Love that. So this chart you're going to see goes back, Mark, to right before COVID, right at the beginning of 2020. And it's the number of container ship crossings through the Suez Canal.
Oh,
I think
God,
it's
not this again.
Yep. I think it's no secret that there's shipping issues right now in the Middle East and the Red Sea. And what you're seeing is the number of ships that are now crossing through the Suez Canal is literally at 11 when it used to average in the low hundreds. You virtually have the situation worsening. No container ships, soon no dry bulk, and no mid-sized tankers either. It's going to prolong shipping. It's going around the Horn of Africa right now until they can get, a sense or control on this. I know the U.S. is trying to get other nations involved. The reason I'm bringing this up is not politically. I'm bringing this up from a business standpoint of supply chains. The last roughly 12 months, if a company said, oh, we missed earnings because of supply chain issues. No, you just had very poor management. That excuse worked a couple years ago. Unfortunately, they might have some excuses for missing on supply chain because literally the Red Sea shut down, and this data point proves it. The interesting thing for me from a geopolitical standpoint is Egypt gets a majority of their revenue through the fees for tankers to go through the Suez Canal. You want to talk about a country that is motivated to get things back to normal. If any country in the world is, they are. Any comments, Mark?
Yeah, this pretty bad timing, right? Because we seem to have inflation under control right now, and
Yep.
this would not be ideal. I think we've talked about it before that the worst case scenario is inflation comes down and then right as it's bottoming just skyrockets back up, and we've seen that in the past in the U.S. economy. So hopefully they get this figured out. What are they attributing this to? Just the conflict in the Middle East right now?
Yeah, it's the some militants that are associated with Iran loosely, it seems, from Yemen that are attacking these ships, and they're wanting, in essence, money to release them. So
Hmm.
it kind of seems to be the MO right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because this is the first time I've heard about this. So, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
we'll
not
see,
ideal.
but definitely,
Definitely
yeah,
not
it's like
ideal.
in essence the Suez Canal is shut down right now. And again, if you look at the you know how you can track flights, you can track ships.
Yeah.
Everything's just going around the Horn of Africa right now. It's going from Asia around the Horn and up. All right, next, my last thing, and this is very spot on in my opinion. Our friend JC Peretz had a post on January 26th. Mark, you ready? Quote: I totally agree with Charlie Munger when he told Warren Buffett, if people weren't wrong so often, we wouldn't be so rich. And JC says, it's so good, so true. Betting on humans making poor choices is much easier than pretending you know something that the market doesn't.
Hmm.
And the reason I want to highlight this is now that the market is calmer compared to what we were dealing with in 2022, I want to remind our listeners and viewers, guess what? A sell-off and a correction is probably going to happen sometime this year. A good 5, maybe even 10, 15% is going to happen sometime this year.
Oh,
And
and I wouldn't be not to interrupt you, but I wouldn't
please.
be surprised if we're starting that right now because again, if you look back at data, typically, the year or election years start off decent in January, and then there's a correction in February or March before things start to get better in Q2 and into Q3. So, not saying it's going to happen, but just don't be shocked if we go through a couple week period or over the next month and a half or so where the markets kind of stink.
Yeah, and what's going to happen is always in these corrections, you're going to have everyone come out of the woodwork, the naysayers, oh, this is the beginning of the next fill in the blank. People are going to make poor choices, deviate from their plan. They got a long-term investment time horizon, but they're going to try to time this correction and get back in. And the point I'm trying to make is don't fall into those traps as much as possible. Be looking at why you're invested. What is your time horizon? What is your risk tolerance? And when you are making those decisions, you have to accept that these corrections are going to happen. They will. And they're not fun going through them. The problem is people associate the pain of 22 as an example, that every sort of market correction or sell-off is going to be that deep and take that long to recover, which is not true. So
Right.
that is my intellectual wisdom I'm passing along for the day.
Matt's intellectual wisdom. We might have to make that a regular topic on the show
On the
going
podcast?
forward. Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Matt. I will. I'm going to turn it over to you and Taylor. I'm going to get out of here, so Taylor can go over the financial planning topic of the week. But as always, thanks for all your great information, and I'll be back with everybody next week.
Look forward to it, Mark. All right, welcome on the podcast, Miss Taylor Ledbetter, fan favorite, paraplanner, wealth advisor here at Jessup Wealth Management. She pins a monthly column on our website, jessupwealthmanagement.com, with financial planning tidbits. And we had the blessing of having her on the podcast every once in a while to continue to share different wisdom. Taylor, how you doing? What's on deck this time?
Yeah, I'm good. So today I want to talk about if you're maxing out your 401k, what you should do with any extra money. Because that is a question I get quite frequently is like, I've maxed out my employer plan, what's the next step or where do I go next?
Love it. Should be a good topic.
Yeah. So I'm going to be referencing an article that I found on a website called Plan Corp. and it's just called maxing out your 401k.
Okay.
So as a reminder, the contribution limits do change every year slightly. So in 2024, if you are 50 or younger, the most you can put into a 401k is $23,000.
Mhm.
And if you are above age 50, you're eligible for a catch-up contribution, and that amount is 7,500.
Yep.
So if you're older than 50, the most you can put in is about 30,500 in 2024. So what I really liked about this article is instead of diving into all of the different accounts you can establish, it talked about just what personal finance areas should be pretty set in place first before going over to other investment accounts.
Okay. Makes sense.
So some of these fundamentals I'm about to go over, they're going to sound really basic, but they're very important.
I agree.
So if you're maxing out your 401k and you're looking to put additional money elsewhere, I think the first thing you need to look at is, do you have an emergency fund set into place? So I know I hear 3 to 6 months is the general rule of thumb. I think that if you're a two-income household, 3 months of living expenses is fine. If you are a single income household, I think you need about 6 months of expenses saved away.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Um, yeah, and preferably, if you do have an emergency fund established, setting that up in maybe a high yield savings account or some type of money market fund, because hopefully, that money's just going to sit there and you don't need it for anything. So might as well earn a little bit of interest, while you can.
Yeah, my kind of 2 cents for people is, I know you see this too, boots on the ground. Our younger individuals tend to have not enough in savings, and I see that older individuals, and I'm going to specifically say individuals, say over the age of 55, tend to have too much in savings relative to their total liquid net worth. And the reason I talk about that is just opportunity cost. If you're going to keep that level of cash of your liquid net worth not invested, and you have inflation just eating away at that money, and it's like
hmm
that for 5, 10, 15 years, I think you really need to sit down and analyze that. But generally speaking, not enough Americans have adequate emergency funds, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, with interest rates being at a higher point recently, I think a lot of the high yield savings accounts are earning around 4, maybe 5%, but that's not normal. So
No,
that's
it's
not
not.
going to
And
last very
most
long.
likely, yeah, exactly. Good point, Taylor. They're going to come down. Most likely, not
Mhm.
guaranteed, the interest rate is probably going to come down. So will the rates of those money markets, right?
Exactly. And yeah,
Yeah,
so just to add to your point, that's why you really shouldn't keep over that 3 to 6 month threshold.
roger that.
Um, This article also said that the emergency fund you do build up in your late 20s might not cover your expenses as you get into your 30s and 40s. So just a reminder to reevaluate the balance that you are keeping on the side, because your needs are going to change over time.
Yes.
So I think the emergency fund is probably the most important, if you don't have that established. So the next idea this article threw out was just having the appropriate insurance coverage.
Yep.
And I think this is an area that is overlooked, because, hopefully you'll never have to use the life insurance as long as you're working, life insurance or disability insurance. But I think those are very important areas that you really need to have in place. Um, I recommend about 10 times your annual salary in life insurance. Every family's needs are going to be completely different, but you have to think about, if you have a mortgage, would your spouse be able to continue on with that payment? If you have kids, Are they going to go to college? Do you need to have money on the side for that? So that's why I say about 10 times your annual salary in life insurance.
I think it's a good rule of thumb. I really do, especially those with financial dependents, like a spouse or children. I think it's a spot on, very good generalized rule, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just adding on to that, I think disability can get overlooked a little bit after you go through the health insurance with your employer and maybe getting some life insurance. Um, I did see a statistic one time. I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something about you're more likely to go on disability than you are
Mm,
to have your life insurance paid out, at least while you're working.
yeah,
So I think it's very important to have adequate coverage on the disability side too.
love that. Real quick, I got a little tidbit for our listeners and viewers. There's a really good website. It's called lifehappens.org, lifehappens.org. And they have a really good life insurance needs calculator that I think is very basic. It's a series of 7 questions, and it generally says, hey, in order to properly cover you with all the things that are important to you and the people who are financially dependent on you, this is how much life insurance you need. It asks questions such as your income, debt levels, marital status, relationship status, kids, etc. So if you're looking for kind of and I think who funds that site is the life insurance industry. So at least you kind of know who's backing that, but not a bad
Mhm.
calculator.
Yeah. Yeah. And not everybody needs life insurance. I mean, if you're not married, you don't have any financial dependents, maybe you don't own property, there's no reason to have it. So,
Well
using a
said.
calculator like you just suggested is
Well
another
said.
good reason.
Good. We come across people that have all this group term, but they have no financial
Hmm.
dependence. They have no debt. It's like,
Hmm.
let's save some money here.
Yeah, don't need to pay all those premiums.
Yeah.
Um, So next, the article talked about limiting your bad debt. If you already have your emergency fund set up and you have adequate insurance coverage, this is just another idea if you have a lot of that bad debt. So specifically the high interest debt, most likely that's going to be credit cards for the most part. Because if you're carrying a huge load of bad debt with a very high interest rate, that can really impact your savings down the line. So you should consider prioritizing that debt repayment first.
Agreed.
And then let's see. So next, the article goes on and talks about the accounts. So maybe you do have those basic fundamentals covered. It talks about contributing to a regular traditional IRA and then a Roth IRA. So I know we talk about these 2 types of accounts pretty often. Um, so we'll just start with the traditional IRA. Obviously, this is a pre-tax account. Um, if you're maxing out your 401k, chances are you might be more of a high income earner.
Hmm.
So with a traditional IRA, you do get that tax deduction for your contributions, which will be very helpful come tax time. But something that is very important to point out, and I don't think this is talked about too much, if you are an active participant in your employer plan, so say you contribute to a 401k, and maybe you also contribute to a traditional IRA. If you file married filing joint and your income is above 136,000, you cannot deduct any of your IRA contributions.
Correct.
If your income is between 116,000 and 136, you'll receive a partial deduction.
Hmm.
But to receive the full deduction, you cannot make more than 116 grand.
Yep. And it's prorated in that middle range based upon where you're at with it.
Right.
Yep.
So that's the downside. Again, if your income is above these thresholds, but you can also do a Roth IRA contribution instead. The downside to the Roth contributions is that they're not tax deductible. That advantage comes later on during retirement because withdrawals are completely tax-free.
Yep.
Now, there's no rule about if you contribute to a 401k, if that affects your Roth contributions. That doesn't exist with a regular Roth IRA. But again, if you are a high income earner, there are income limits when contributing to a Roth IRA. So if you are married filing joint, you have to make under 240 grand. And if you're single, you have to make under 161 grand to be eligible to make Roth IRA contributions. So if you're under these limits, I know I kind of said this earlier, may be best to just contribute to a traditional IRA instead, because again, that's tax deferred. So a lot of that's really just going to depend on how much money you're making to decide which one's the better option.
Makes sense.
Mhm. And then the last idea this article threw out was contributing to an HSA. I do think HSAs are great. I don't think they take precedent over contributing to a traditional or a Roth. That's just my opinion. I think if you have a little extra cash to do maybe an IRA and an HSA, that's great, but I wouldn't choose an HSA over, a retirement account.
I agree with that.
So yeah, so just a couple criteria is that to contribute to an HSA, you do have to have access to a high deductible health plan.
Yep.
Contributions are tax deductible, earnings grow tax free, and withdrawals are also tax free as long as the funds are used for healthcare expenses that are qualified. If you're older than 65, you can withdraw funds for non-medical expenses completely penalty-free. That penalty is 20%. But again, if it's for a non-medical expense, you will pay taxes on that withdrawal.
And it'll be considered ordinary income because someone will ask that. we know we know our viewers. Yeah, it's ordinary income for anything above that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a good add-on. Good catch.
And the other thing is you can invest now a lot of HSAs, where in the past that wasn't the case. It was just like in a savings account or cash or money market type of equivalent. A lot of these custodians now are offering you, because the money could sit there for years and years. There are a lot of investment options. I'm starting to see kind of like a 401k, mutual
Mhm.
fund options. You're starting to see that more and more with these HSAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder how aggressive the investment options would be. I'm sure it's different everywhere you go, but
Yeah, I've seen them look just kind of like a normal 401k menu, believe it or not. It's kind of what I normally kind of see.
yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a huge advantage right there.
Yeah, especially if you have the money there for a long time. I mean, I got people that will literally just save and save and save in these HSAs, and hey, I'm going to tap into this slowly in my retirement for my healthcare, expenses, another account to tap into. And if you can have that discipline and not need that cash flow for the expenses while you're working, more power to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah, that was pretty much all the important points this article pointed out. I agreed with everything for the most part, so I thought it would be an interesting topic to bring up on the podcast.
Great job, Taylor, as always. Wonderful topic. Switching gears briefly, want to talk about our podcast. If you want to create your own podcast, definitely check out our hosting site that we use called Blueberry. That is spelled Blubrry. And you can use promo code Jessup Wealth. That's all lowercase Jessup Wealth to get your first month of Blueberry podcasting hosting for free. You can use and choose the ideal plan for you. Use their hosting estimator on their website. Again, first month free using the promo code Jessup Wealth, all lowercase, no spaces. So as we sign off on the podcast this week, episode number 237, Taylor, any final thoughts of wisdom this week?
Um, I think you and Mark really covered some good market research in this podcast. So I think a lot of the viewers are going to enjoy some of the stats you go over. Um, but yeah, no additional comments from what you and Mark talked about today.
Perfect. Well, we're in the middle of earnings season, ladies and gentlemen. If you see some major moves in stocks, it's probably because they just reported quarterly earnings. Market has had a good move the last 3 or 4 months. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if it took a breather here in February. I don't think it's the end of the world. Just personal opinion. So keep listening. Thank you for listening to episode number 237 of the Independent Advisors Podcast. We'll be back next week with episode number 238. Myself, Taylor, Jenna, Mark, we thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Independent Advisors Podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, hit the subscribe button so you can be notified every time a new episode gets released. Feel free to share with friends, family, and follow us on Twitter at Jessup Wealth, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Mark and Matt will continue to share beneficial information on these social media sites. Also, check out the podcast tab on their website. That's www.jessupwealthmanagement.com. There you'll find links to every episode of the Independent Advisors. Have questions or topics you want to discuss on the show? Message us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or send an email with the words questions and topics in the subject line to inquiries@jessupwealthmanagement.com. We'll talk about it right here on the podcast. Certain sections of this commentary may contain forward-looking statements based on reasonable expectations, estimates, projections, and assumptions. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future performance and involve certain risks and uncertainties which are difficult to predict. All indices are unmanaged and are not available for direct investment by the public. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and does not constitute either tax, legal, or financial advice. Although we do go to great lengths to make sure our information is accurate and useful, we recommend you consult a tax preparer, professional tax advisor, financial advisor, or lawyer regarding your specific circumstances. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. No strategy can guarantee any objective or goal will be achieved.